Hey everyone, Daniel playing at String Lingo here. Today we're going to be looking at how to approach applying the changes to All of Me, which is a fantastic jazz standard. And this tune is a really great place to start if you want to get into jazz and modulation, because the changes aren't really far out. All of the dominant chords are secondary dominants in the key of C. So it's not really anything exotic, but it is stretching your ear in terms of starting to hear some chromatic chords and changes outside of just a regular major scale. So here we go. The first approach is going to be just playing scales over the changes. Now, this is just going to get us used to changing the scale we're using over the chord as the chord changes. For example, C major, we're just going to play C major scale, and I'm going to do this in a really methodic way at first, just from the root of the scale. So we'll have C major. Our next change is E7. So I'm just going to hop right down to the root of E and play an E mixolydian scale. And so on through the changes. So let's see how that sounds. 1, 2, 3, 4. A mixo, D minor, E mixolydian, A minor, D7, D minor, and G. And so on. So the next approach would be to do something very similar, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to start on the root of C, but I'm going to play C major going one direction in first position until I can't anymore, and I'm going to flip directions and start playing down a scale. And then wherever I am in the scale, I'm going to have to flip my brain to switch to the next chord scale. So that would sound a little bit like this. 2, 3, 4. Noticed there was one moment in there where I actually had a little half-step chromatic moment, so I really need to be aware of, wow, where does that sharp become a natural or that natural become a sharp, because I might have an opportunity to really hear these little intimate places between the chord changes that I want to be able to take advantage of when I end up improvising and playing through these changes faster. Now with both of these approaches, ideally we get to the point where we're playing eighth notes through the changes. But it's great to start with quarters because you're just wrapping your brain around this new idea. So here, for example, done, 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4, C, E, Okay, so going through the changes with eighth notes, and again, I was being pretty systematic about that, really orienting myself when the chord changes to the root of that chord. Good, so we've looked a little bit at playing through the changes with scale motion, okay, always moving by step. Now let's do the same thing, but we're going to be playing the arpeggios of the chords, again from the root. And I'll go back down. second approach, you would as you can see, kind of about halfway through, I went from the first approach, where I was really orienting to the root, to approach where I'm going up and then going down and kind of drifting through the changes a little bit less systematically, so that I start to really feel and grasp a flow through them. And this is going to train my instinct in a really beautiful way, because I want to have fluency as I move through the changes. And this is just one more way to start to really develop that. Another approach I might take is to take a snippet of the melody and make a little motif from that and see how that fits over the changes. Now, the great thing about All of Me is that the melody itself already does this. We can see the melody starts here with a little C arpeggio, right? And then when it goes into the next chord change, we just have an E arpeggio there. And then it even goes on. These are all chord tones, A7, A, G, and E. So we already have a motif to work with. If we continued that, we would end up with, we could do it there, or we could do it there. And this is where we really need to have trained and understand arpeggios. So if we have a map of the arpeggios of all these chords over the instrument, at least in first position, we're going to have built the framework and really laid the foundation for ourselves to make this easy. Now, let's hear what that might sound like and see where we go with it. 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to go not with the melody. So we can continue going up. And we can build a solo over this. This has musical shape now. What about the same motif but going up? So you can really take this idea of grabbing this motif and overlaying it over each of the chords. Now again, I was being really systematic just to see what are the options here. How can this lay out over the chords? But what we can do is start to use that as a framework and then fill in some of the space in between. So I'm going to try and do something similar in terms of the arpeggios I was using that time, but I'm going to start filling in some of the space in between. So let's hear how that sounds like. You can even start with the melody. get a little bit of the idea of where we might be able to go with this, we can really create a lot of musical shape this way. And it sounds a lot less square, even though you're giving yourself a lot of structure. The last approach I want to talk about is taking a lick-based approach for playing over the changes. And this can be done a couple of ways. Again, we can kind of pick a simple lick that's oriented to, say, the third of the chord. So if I want to have kind of a little blues lick, something like this, I can orient to the third of every chord and overlay this lick just to see how does that sound and how does it work? How does it feel on the instrument? So now E, A, so again, that was taking a pretty systematic approach to this, but if maybe I can start to combine some of these approaches, now I'm starting to really build myself a map for how to move through these changes and hear some of these things and how they fit in context. Let's try some of that. So I was really hitting the third of every chord there, but there's something that's really satisfying about this because you're outlining the changes in a very clear way. The third is one of the most important notes that colors the harmony. And so by kind of discovering our way through the changes of the tune and hearing this kind of little bluesy motion on the third, we're starting to train our ears to hear licks and how a lick might move through the harmony. That's really going to help this tune come alive more when you're improvising over it, really outlining the thirds and also the sevenths of the chord and taking advantage of those as you're moving through the changes. Let's take this idea of a lick and make it really simple. Let's just take a note like E. And we're just kind of playing around that note E. And let's see how it works over the changes. So inside of this, there's a couple of ideas that I was exploring. One is just hanging out on one note or around one note and really listening and finding out, is that note consonant to the chord? Or in other words, does it fit the harmony? Or is it dissonant to the harmony? We want to get comfortable with dissonance as well as with harmony. The other idea I was exploring is taking that one note and jumping back and forth between it and another chord tone. So as the harmony changes, we'll discover some of the relationships that way as well. So if we hang out on one note and just allow the harmony to change around us, something really interesting can happen. So hopefully this gives you some great ideas to start with. Again, start out systematically, and then as you're grasping the changes, whether it's with the arpeggios or the scale, start to move through them a little bit more subtly and kind of smooth those edges out so that you're not just being really square and always starting on the root or always starting on the third. I want you to move as quickly as possible into a place where you're really flowing through the changes, and that's going to give you an advantage as you're trying to improvise. If you like this video, please subscribe and check out stringlingo.com for more tips on training improv.